So the certification you're speaking of is in addition to your license to practice medicine, correct?
Correct.
Were you previously on staff or affiliated with any academic or medical organizations?
So when I was a resident at University of Illinois, I was an instructor, and then after I left University of Illinois and joined the medical examiner's office, I was still an assistant professor, and I think I still have the title, but it's really pretty inactive. I do not do any teaching there. And then after I left the medical examiner's office in '91, I also actually worked at Cook County Hospital on a part-time basis, and part of my duties involved supervising the residents for autopsies and doing quality assurance. And I was also teaching medical students who came to Cook County Hospital from Chicago Medical School.
So your current employment status is self-employed?
Yes.
Doctor, what is an autopsy?
An autopsy is an examination of a body where we do an external examination to note any physical characteristics, any scars, tattoos, etc. Then we make a Y-shaped incision and any injuries, of course. Then you make a Y-shaped incision that goes from one shoulder to the other and then down the midline. We examine the organs in situ, that means while they are in the body itself, and then we remove the organs and examine them individually. And then we also may take little pieces of tissue, like a biopsy, to look under the microscope. We also then open the head by an incision that goes from one ear to the other. And then we reflect the scalp, look at the skull, then we look at the brain while it is in the cranium, and then we take the brain out and examine it. And then we can do other things depending on the issues and what the findings are from the external examination and what the clinical history would suggest. We can open the back, remove the spinal cord. We can make incisions on the body to show any other injuries that are internal. As we are doing this, we also take photographs, and then before you remove all the organs, we collect blood, bile, urine, any tissue like liver, lung, heart, etc. that we want to send for toxicology too at the same time. And we send that out to a laboratory.
How many autopsies have you performed in your career?
I've performed like 6,000 postmortem examinations.
And how many?
I've examined a few living patients.
Okay. How many gunshot wound autopsies have you performed?
I would say hundreds. I really don't keep count. When I was working at Cook County, there were actually more gunshot wound cases than there are now. And then after I left the medical examiner's office in '91, I continued to do autopsies for the various counties, including Kane County, DuPage County, McHenry County, etc. And they also had gunshot wound cases.
Have you authored any research or publications in forensic pathology?
I've authored and presented some papers at the national meetings, and the only relevant one is one gunshot wound paper on atypical gunshot wounds.
Have you ever testified or consulted as an expert in forensic pathology?
Yes, and that's what I mainly do now. I will do some second autopsies or exhumation autopsies, but I'm in the process of retiring, and when you do an autopsy, it goes on forever. So I will do a second autopsy or an exhumation autopsy if questions arise after the fact.
So how many times have you approximately testified as an expert in forensic pathology?
Hundreds of times.
For the state or the defense?
For both, actually. And when I worked for the medical examiner's office, or I did autopsies for the coroners actually I did autopsy from the coroners from 1991 to about 2005, 2008. I thought it was 2005, but I relatively recently testified on a case from 2008. So I would testify for the state. But towards the late 90s and early 2000s, I started getting more calls for consultation from defense. So I testify for defense. I also work a lot with the Innocence Project people, the different Innocence Project people in Chicago and actually around the country, and review cases for them.
What is the Innocence Project?
I'll allow it in. All right. Go ahead, doctor. You're going to explain what it is.
So the Innocence Project people are people who look at cases of people who've been convicted and then feel like they've been convicted, but they were innocent. So they go back and look at the case. A lot of the cases were on DNA, which was started by New York. But now the focus is shift on other kinds of cases like fire investigations, which we have found that a lot of the science was false. And
It's the things he's talking about, arson, things that are outside her field.
and I actually mostly look at baby cases that somebody has been convicted of.
Okay, thank you. How many times, well, let me ask it this way. You said you testified for both the state and defense, right?
Yeah.
So would you say you testified more for the state or more for the defense?
If I were to count up everything through the years, it's probably more for the state. But
Well,
those
I'm
were,
sorry, someone coughed. Doctor, speak up a little bit.
so if I were to count throughout all the years, I have probably testified for the state more than for the defense.
Have you also done criminal cases? I'm
Actually,
sorry, civil.
All right,
Civil.
let's go.
I do civil cases too, and actually many of those were used to be for the plaintiff, but now I testify both for the plaintiffs and the defense.
Did you say the last time you testified for the state was when?
The last time I testified for the state was earlier this year on a case that came back that I had done the autopsy.
And in this particular case, Doctor, were you paid by the defense?
Yes.
And how much were you paid?
So I'm going to get paid. I think I billed till I wrote my report 9,000 something, and I was paid that.
What is the difference between doing an autopsy and writing a consultation report, like in this case?
So when you do an autopsy, the purpose of doing the autopsy is to make sure that you document all your findings. Because when you're doing the autopsy, the body has to be buried, and you really don't know what are the questions that are going to rise as anything proceed. What are the questions the family is going to ask? What are the questions in the legal proceedings that are going to be raised? So you may not think of all of those. So at that time, you're just concentrated on giving a cause and manner of death. But if you document everything, then if other questions arise, then you can go back and look at it. So I've looked at my own cases back at circumstances, look at time of death when the prosecutor comes back to ask me questions of that, or the defense retains me to ask questions like that. So that there are all other kinds of questions that can arise, and you really never ever know what questions are going to arise. So if everything is documented in the autopsy by not only dictating it and writing it, but also by photographs, radiology, and now we are doing CTs and etc. too. So we have other modalities that will document so that anybody else who looks at the case sees the same findings. They may come to different conclusions, but the findings are still the same. So when I do a case as a consultant, I really go back and look at everything and then ask the attorneys, what are the questions? If I do an autopsy myself, I also ask myself, what are the questions that can possibly arise from this case? And what should I do to make sure that I document the findings supporting my opinion or not supporting my opinion? So it depends on what kind of a case it is, because there are no two cases that are identical.
Thank you. Judge, at this time, I would tender Dr. T's and ask that she be found to be an expert in forensic pathology.
Thank you. State. I find that Dr. Tees is qualified to testify as an expert in the area of forensic pathology. Proceed.
Thank you. Dr. Tees, were you asked by the defense in this case to review the autopsy of Laquan McDonald performed on October 21st, 2014?
Yes,
Did you prepare a report?
I did.
Do you have your report to refer to that would assist you in your testimony today?
I do.
Judge, I'd ask that Dr. Tees be permitted to refer to her report during her
Can I have the
testimony.
attorneys over here for a second, please? Thank you very much, State Defense. Ms. Wint, proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Do you know Dr. Arun Kumar?
I do.
How do you know her?
Dr. Arun Kumar was a resident at Cook County Hospital when I was working there part-time.
Okay, so how long have you known her?
So I don't know what year she was exactly, but I left Cook County in 2000. So I think she was probably a first or second year. So probably since the late 90s.
Now, you know she testified in this case. for
I
the
do.
State, correct?
I
Okay.
do.
Did you have any conversations with Dr. Arun Kumar regarding this case?
I did.
Can you tell me when?
So I had partially prepared my autopsy last year when I went to the National Association of Medical Examiners meeting in, I think it was in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I saw her there and I was talking about some of this stuff. So I inquired of her why Dr. Sina had assigned the case to Dr. Means, who was pretty junior at that time.
Who's Dr.?
Sustained. Doctor, stick to the facts. All right, this is a personal opinion of yours, and that's not a professional opinion.
And did you have any other conversations with her?
So then I had another conversation with her in her office when I was talking to her about another case. I was very confused about the toxicology results and how they had been done. So I was inquiring about that, why there were these 3 different labs that had done it and at different times, and that where was really the report that said that risperidone was negative, because that's what I kept on hearing, that it was negative, but there was no report saying that it was negative, though there was a requisition saying that it was requested.
Okay, and we'll get into toxicology later, but did Dr. Arun Kumar address those questions you had?
She just told me that's what the NMS, which is the laboratory they had sent to, does it, and that they don't give you a negative result. And I actually did ask her to discuss the rest of the case, but she didn't know who was going to testify. So.
Did you ask her about any other discrepancies?
I wanted to discuss with her about the issues I had with some of the gunshot wounds, but she said that she didn't know who was going to testify.
Is it uncommon to speak to the medical examiner on cases like this?
No, it's not uncommon on any case. And I have talked to Dr.
Overrule.
Go ahead.
And I have talked to Dr. Arun Kumar on other cases. She's been cooperative.
She wasn't cooperative on this case?
Well, she didn't want to discuss it, so I mean, I can't pass a comment whether she was cooperative or not. Either.
Okay. Thank you. Doctor, did you read Dr. Michalski's opinion in this case?
I did.
Okay, and he is a medical examiner. I'm sorry, he's a pathologist, correct?
He's a forensic pathologist with the Department of Defense, which used to be called the AFIP. So they have a whole department that does autopsies on either natural deaths or traumatic death that occur in the Army, Navy, whatever. So yes, I talked to him. I know him. I spent 2 days with him.
So you know him?
I do.
Okay. Did you have questions for him?
I did.
What did you ask him?
So again, it was at the name meeting. I asked him if he would like to, if I can discuss the case with him because I have some issues, and he said he would, and then, but he said he would do it the next day because he was doing a presentation, and the next day he said I can't.
So he didn't answer any of your questions?
He did not want to discuss it.
What was his opinion with regard to the rapidly fatal shots?
His opinion was that what was described as gunshot wound number 2 and 4 were the fatal shots.
Did he say rapidly fatal?
Yes.
What does that mean?
It just, nobody has a time for saying rapidly or instantaneously, but that the person would be dead pretty soon after they sustained it.
Did he say that any of the gunshots besides 2 and 4 were rapidly fatal.
No, not in his report at least.
To you, did he say that?
I beg your pardon?
You said not in his report,
Yeah, he did not say that any of the other gunshots were rapidly fatal.
and he didn't say that to you either.
No, we really didn't discuss the case because I had a partial PowerPoint prepared and I was going to really talk to him about each of the gunshot wounds because he had just repeated what was in the autopsy report
Okay.
and not commented on each gunshot wound.
Did you know that he did not testify for the state in this case?
I just,
Excuse me, what has this got to do with this case? All right.
It just,
It has nothing to do with their opinion, whether a witness testifies or not. All right, sustained, move on.
do you know Dr. Means?
no, I do not.
Can you tell the jury what documents you reviewed, materials in preparing your report?
So I reviewed the autopsy report and all the umpteen diagrams that went with it, all the toxicology report, the investigation report from the medical examiner's office, and there were sheets of inventory and other documents that the ME's office keeps. I reviewed all the autopsy photographs and all the imaging studies that the medical examiner had done. I reviewed the medical records from Mount Sinai. I reviewed the EMS reports. I reviewed interviews that the FBI conducted with Dr. Means and the paramedics. I reviewed the Chicago Police Report and the tactical response team. Then I reviewed the scene photographs. I reviewed the video, and I reviewed 3 sets of the still images from the video that had 790 images. Then I reviewed the hospital file from Hartgrove and DCFS and from the juvenile code in reference to Laquan McDonald. I think I reviewed some other documents. I did review the slow motion video recently. I also reviewed Dr. Miller and Dr. O'Donnell's report. And I also already mentioned that I had a conversation with about toxicology with Dr. Arun Kumar. And then I also went and reviewed the clothing where the evidence was kept.
Did you prepare a PowerPoint presentation to assist you in your testimony today?
I did.
And how did you prepare that?
So I took all actually I prepared it so that I could figure out how the wounds were. I took the autopsy photographs, the radiology, and the diagrams actually, and the notes, and looked at each gunshot wound separately to see how they correlate from one to the other and whether the description showed all the findings that were described in the report.
So your PowerPoint consists of photographs from the state, of the autopsy, x-rays.
Correct.
How is it numbered and organized?
So I just tried to put everything together with the way the gunshot wounds were described by Dr. Means. It's not necessarily the way I would have done them, but I just left it that way. So that we could look at gunshot wound number 1, and I could talk about the injuries from that and what was done, what was not done, and then went on 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So the first 16 PowerPoints are the 16 gunshot wounds as described by Dr. Means.
Thank you.
Sure.
Doctor, I'm showing you what's been marked as defense number 7 for identification. Do you recognize this?
Yes, we're working on the PowerPoint on it yesterday.
PowerPoint presentation that you just spoke of.
Correct.
Judge, at this time I'd ask you to publish this to the jury.
Are you moving it into evidence, or it's going to be demonstrative evidence?
I will ask you to move it into evidence as well.
Well, go ahead.
I'm asking you to move it into evidence and publish to the jury.
Any objections today? All right, at this time, the identification marks will be stricken. There's a question whether it's demonstrative evidence or real evidence. So, but the state has no objection to you publishing it. So it will be published and we'll determine whether it be real evidence or demonstrative evidence at a later time.
Thank you, Judge. So, Doctor, as I'm pulling up this PowerPoint, I'd like to ask that we go through this the way that Dr. Means did the autopsy, identified each gunshot wound in the autopsy.
Correct.
Okay, so can we get the lights, please? Thank you. Doctor, could you please describe and evaluate what is shown in this first slide?
So this is Laquan's head with his face down, and it shows the wound that was described as gunshot wound number 1. And it's on the left side of the head, right about here, just above the ear.
And for the record, the doctor is pointing to her left
At this time,
head.
we're going to take a short recess. Take the lights on. Take the ladies and gentlemen back to the jury room.
All rise for the jury.
Will everybody please be seated? Doctor, please be seated. Just having a little bit of technical difficulty. You know how to do the judicial override? Go ahead, Joe. Well, there's people that check that out in the morning, right? No, she's not here. All right, everything's going on. All right, at this, thank you, James. Thank you. But bring the jury out, please.
All rise for the jury.
Because they're not sitting, I'm gonna call them. They're not sitting. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Jim. Will everybody please be seated? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. What happened was we had a little bit of technical difficulty that has been fixed. So proceed, Ms. Wayne.
Thank you, Judge.
Someone get the lights.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So, Doctor, we left off where I asked if you could just evaluate this wound, describe and evaluate.
So as I described, that it's on the left side of the head. This is Laquan's head is face down, and it's on the left side, and it's going, I don't know which side, front to back.
The doctor has pointed to her left head, left side of her head. You don't know which direction it came from, did you say?
No, you cannot tell because sometimes you can tell with a grazed wound. What this looks like is what we call a laceration. A laceration is an injury where the entire thickness of the skin has been traversed by the wound. And abrasion is where just the superficial layers of the skin are gone. So
Can I
sometimes
stop you for 1 second? What does traverse mean?
traverse means traveling in a direction.
Go ahead.
So sometimes with a grazed wound, you can tell the direction, but you need to shave the hair around it to see what the abrasion that's around it looks like. And in this case, that has not been done. So you cannot comment on it either way. So it could be going from front to back or back to front, either way.
Is it standard procedure to shave?
Yes, it is.
Can you determine, would you have been able to determine the track had it been dissected?
You may have been, but this way you definitely.
I'm sorry, with doctor, when there's an objection, you're a professional. Don't
Okay.
keep testifying. You understand me?
I do. I did not hear the objection. I'm sorry.
Thank you. All right, state what's your objection. I'll allow you wide latitude on cross-examination. Overrule. Go ahead. Defense.
Thank you. Doctor, you can answer that question.
So if you shave it, you may be able to tell conclusively that it goes in that way. But if you don't have it, then you cannot tell for sure.
Would dissection have shown the track?
There's nothing to dissect here because it's just gone through the entire thickness of the skin. The scalp is skin, excepting it's thicker than the rest of the skin on our body. That's all.
Can you tell from the autopsy and the photographs whether or not this wound is bleeding profusely?
There is no bleeding. Head wounds, especially running in that direction, bleed profusely because the blood vessels run across. And so when the skin is cut, they will bleed profusely, but there's no leakage of blood at autopsy or from the photographs that were taken at the hospital.
And where would that leakage of blood have been shown, had there been?
It would be just leaking out all over. Sometimes at autopsy, it still continues to leak.
Do you see blood in his hair?
No, not much. There is a little blood. Whenever you cut the skin, there is going to be some bleeding, but it's not bleeding that I would call bleeding that is going all over.
Well, in your opinion, did this wound cause bleeding that would have contributed to his death in under 30 minutes?
So if this wound did bleed, it bled very little and would be very insignificant. So it would not cause, I would say that it did not cause death and would not contribute to cause of death.
Not contribute, did you say?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. The medical examiner, I know that you heard, described a subarachnoid brain bleed.
So yeah, she described in her report, she said there was subarachnoid, I don't know whether she said mild or minimal, there was mild subarachnoid hemorrhage in the left temporal and parietal lobes of the brain. The brain is divided into the right and the left side, and each side, the cerebrum, is divided into the frontal, the parietal on the center, the occipital at the back, and the temporal is actually a little underneath, like almost behind your ear. And so she described that, but then in her notes, she wrote that there was mild subarachnoid hemorrhage on the right side. And there is no photograph to, first of all, sort out whether this is the right or the left, or whether it's of any significance. Subarachnoid hemorrhage can occur from many different things, including injury. Actually, the commonest cause is probably more natural if you have massive subarachnoid, but it can, and we often see it in cases with asphyxia, or you can see it when somebody who has been has lost their pulse, has lost the perfusion pressure for blood to go in, and then has been resuscitated where circulation is established to a minimal extent. So it could be, or you can see it from a fall, and Laquan did fall at the end. So without the documentation, I am very reluctant to assign any significance to it. And usually it's such a, uh, it's a common finding when somebody has been resuscitated that I'm not willing to assign any significance to it.
And by documentation, you mean without evidence that there was this brain bleed
So
you're stating?
in forensic pathology, documentation means that not only just you write it, you show it so that somebody else who looks at it and say, yes, this is a significant bleed, this is significant. Writing is not just accepted. So it should be photographed. Photographed, yes. Maybe more than one photograph. So technically, when we do a head autopsy, we photograph the head from the right side, from the front side, from the back side, with the scalp to even see how much hemorrhage there is in the scalp and on the right side. And then when you open the skull, you photograph the brain inside too. And you can also, if the hemorrhage is underneath, then you take it out and then you take the photograph from underneath. And none of that was done.
A photograph would have shown this easily.
It would have shown easily. First of all, it would have clarified, was it right or was it left? And then it would have shown the extent. What does mild mean? Mild is what I may call mild, somebody else may call moderate. So it's a general term. And actually measurements in subarachnoid hemorrhage don't mean anything because the brain is covered with 3 layers of membranes. You have the skin and then you have the skull, and underneath the skull is what we call the dura mater. Then underneath that we have the arachnoid mater, and that's where the blood vessels run. So
Okay, I'm gonna stop you there. I'm
that's
sorry.
it. So that's it.
Okay,
That's where the bleeding was described as.
thank you. At this time, I'm going to show you defense number 8 for identification. May I approach?
Sure, go ahead.
Doctor, I'm showing you defense number 8 for identification. Do you recognize this document?
I do.
Just get the light.
And what is that?
So it's a body diagram that Dr. Means used to document the Gray's wound to the head. And she's got the dimensions written and it's got the name, the date, the case number. And then by the head, she's got mild subgaleal or scalp hemorrhage and then mild subarachnoid hemorrhage.
Thank you. Judge, at this time, I would ask that this be entered into evidence. Identification marker be stricken and published to the jury. I believe it's already in evidence.
Well, any objections?
Your Honor, we have no objection to it being published.
I'm sorry, you're gonna really have to speak up. The doctor was right.
We are objecting at this time to it being admitted. I'm not objecting to it.
We'll take a look at it.
It has not been.
We'll go and give it to her, please. Go ahead.
I saw it.
All right, where did she get that? Where did the defense get it? What are you objecting to it for? All right, overrule.
It's the monster.
So I'm blowing up this exhibit so that everybody can see what you're referring to, Doctor. Can everyone see this? Can everyone see this? Okay.
All right, don't be asking the jury any questions,
I'm
please.
looking
All right.
at this.
Well, you
that
made a
monitor.
excuse me, all
Okay.
right? Let's do this in an orderly fashion. You made a comment, don't do that.
Okay.
all right?
Okay. Can you describe what you see in this
So
document?
this is one of the body diagrams that you can use. The first one shows the top of the head. So you're looking at it head on with the head up. And this actually, the second one actually shows the bone structures again, head on. And the third one is not used, so I won't say anything. So the first one shows with the scalp and there is, the graze is marked as a linear thing in one direction. And then there are some of the measurements for it. Then if you look at the diagram below, you see it's written mild SSH, which stands for mild subscapular hemorrhage. And then below that, it says focal thin SAH, which stands for subarachnoid hemorrhage, right temporal parietal.
So where is the hemorrhage, according to this document?
So she says it's in the right temporal parietal region, but in the report, she said left temporal parietal region. So if it's in the right, it's the opposite side of the grace, which actually doesn't matter, but it gives me no impression of where it really was.
Okay, so this document is the opposite of what her report says as to where this hemorrhage
Correct.
was.
Correct.
Is there any definitive evidence that this gunshot wound occurred while Laquan McDonald was on the ground?
So there's, I mean, it could have, depending on exactly which way it went, but it could have occurred as he was twisting and falling too.
The medical examiner said that he was alive when he sustained this. Do you agree with that?
It all depends on how you want to define alive. I would say, looking at this wound, I would not be able to comment whether he was alive or dead. And definition of death is so different. Anywhere, death is not, in my opinion, an event. It's a process.
Process?
Yes.
All right. I'm gonna go to the next slide. Could you please describe and evaluate this wound?
So this was described as gunshot wound number 2 in Dr. Means's autopsy. And all the entrance wounds are circled in green. And they are all of the 3 pictures show the same thing with different magnification. And it looks like an entrance wound. It's not totally typical, but it's still an entrance wound. And she described that the wound went through the left neck, went through the muscles on the left side, went through the trachea, and then went through the muscles on the right side. So the wound entered. May I stand? May I stand to show?
Oh, Judge, may the witness stand, please?
Sir?
Thank you.
So the entrance wound was here, and it went in which the trachea would be here, the muscles would be here. There are a lot of vessels that are not involved, and then it came out the side, and she recovered the bullet on the back of the shoulder, right about here.
Okay, for the record, the doctor is pointing to entrance on her left neck, exit out your back.
Okay,
Shoulder,
so
right.
so the track is left to right, slightly downwards, front to back. But when we are looking at tracks in autopsies, we are really presuming that we are looking at the body straight with our hands down, flat. And gunshot wounds never occur in that situation. There is always motion on both on the part of the shooter and the victim. So you have to look at many other things to evaluate. And usually the question I would ask is, where was the shooter and where was the victim? And what was his position, to say whether it's consistent with that or not. So anyway, that's an entrance wound. And then if you look at the 2 x-rays here, you can see that you can see the bullet here. And this is a lateral, so it tells you on the back where it is. It's very light, but you can still see it. It's circled, and so it's that same bullet that's showing you. Maybe I just want to put a pink dot right there.
Um,
Well, it doesn't want to be cooperative there, I'm sorry.
All right, so you're identifying the bullet
The bullet.
with a pink dot.
And it's usual to take a photograph of the different sides of the bullet, and then you put it in an envelope, seal it, label it as to where it came from, so it can be sent to the ballistics department for
Okay.
evaluation.
And did you say whether he was upright or on the ground when he sustained this gunshot?
This gunshot wound could not have occurred after reviewing the video, and there's still images when he was on the ground, because we know the relative position of the shooter and Laquan. So this gunshot wound would have to occur when if the officer was to his left, he had to be facing him at least partially, at least his chest was facing him at that point. So his shoulder would be to the back, his neck would be turned this way, so it'd go in here, and that's where it would come out.
So you're saying Laquan's torso was facing Jason Van Dyke,
Correct, at least his chest part, he could be twisted at the waist.
and you know that because of the
Because
trajectory.
of the way the wound traverses in the body.
Okay. And in your opinion,
And sorry, and then I know approximately where the officer was.
in your opinion, after reviewing all the evidence, in the sequence of shots, what shot do you believe that this gunshot was out of the 16 that came out of the firearm?
So if I were to look at, I looked at the video, and I actually looked at the slow motion video. This gunshot wound would have to be the first or the second, depending on exactly how he was facing him.
Were there internal photos taken of this wound track?
There were no internal photos taken to show, and there was actually no description of the opening in the trachea. Did it perforate, or did it penetrate, or did it just lacerate? So when you say something is perforating, that means you're saying it's going in and it's coming out of there. But
Okay.
a bullet can just go into an organ or tissue and just penetrate it. So if it just penetrated the trachea, he could conceivably just swallow the bullet, and the bullet would be just elsewhere. But that didn't happen here. And so nothing was described, and there was no photographs taken of the neck or the trachea. And actually, can we go back to that?
I'm gonna just, well, okay.
If the whole trachea had been traversed, I would see a big whole gap of air where the trachea was traversed. There is a little air, you can see those little black spots, but that came because he had a thoracotomy. They opened his chest, and the air can get everywhere. And they had also intubated him. That means they had put a tube through him that went in pretty easily.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. What does this
So-
slide depict?
So this is described as gunshot wound number 3. And it was Dr. Mean's opinion that the entrance wound was on the left anterior chest, just below the clavicle right here. And that the wound was an exit on the back of the right arm, right about where your deltoid would be. It is my opinion that actually the wound on the arm is the entrance wound, and the exit is the one that we see in the chest. And actually the wound on the back of the arm looks like a typical entrance wound with a very thin rim of abrasion that, if you were looking at the wound straight on, goes from like about 4 o'clock to 10 o'clock, which also may give me the idea that perhaps this bullet is going from the left to the right. There are other reasons that we can go into why I think that it is reversed, but either way, the gunshot wound did not cause any damage to any of the organs. It traversed the muscles. I don't know how much hemorrhage it caused, and I do not think it caused any pulpification, which I have no idea what it means, and I could not find the word. So it is still what I would classify as a superficial wound, just going through the muscles, not maybe underneath the skin. I have no idea whether how much muscle was involved, and it did not cause any damage that would cause him to die in a few minutes or 30 minutes.
So there's no evidence of blood loss,
Correct. There's no documented evidence of blood loss.
and there were no internal photos of the track wound again.
Correct.
And can you show us how this wound, the trajectory of this bullet from this wound?
So in my opinion, the trajectory was
For the
from-
record, Judge, may she please use her probe?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Well, I can't penetrate the probe in my body, but.
Well, okay.
So I think it went in here and it came out here,
All right, for the record, it went
If-
in
went into the back of the arm.
into the
and it
back of
came
the
out
left arm, exited front of
the
left
chest.
chest.
Left chest below the clavicle. If it entered here, then the trajectory would have actually gone from this side to this side somewhere, unless Laquan had his arm in a very contorted position. So I just can't see how the track would occur in that fashion.
And what
But-
position was he in when he sustained
So-
this?
The first gunshot wounds, and I'll hopefully show all of them at the end, came from Laquan's left. So if the wound in the neck and the fourth wound that we haven't talked about caused him to rotate, his arm would be in this position where the wound could have gone in easily and come out here.
And for the record, you're rotating to the right. So that was sustained upright.
Correct. Or he was bent forwards maybe.
We're going to move to the next slide. You describe what's depicted in here.
So this was described as gunshot wound number 4, and it entered the right side of the chest, right to the midline, and it went into the chest, and it was just described as going through the upper lobe of the lung twice, and I think the middle lobe once, but there was no description at all as to exactly where in the lung. The lung is a big organ, and if it involves certain parts of the lung, it's a survivable. But if it transacts and goes into a part of the lung that has the blood vessels, it'll cause massive bleeding right away and be rapidly fatal. So I had to get all that information from the medical record. So this is the entrance wound, and the wound went into the chest, involved the lung, caused a massive right hemothorax. Hemo means blood, thorax means chest. So there was massive blood there that was removed by the hospital when they were trying to resuscitate him. And it went to the back and came out. The bullet was recovered in the back. It was described that it went through the 4th rib, which was fractured. But there was no mention of a 6th rib being fractured, but there was a fracture of the 6th rib. Right where you see this little green arrow, you can see the rib sticking out.
Can you
count-
circle that, please? And what you're circling there is evidence of a fracture?
Of the 6th rib. And if it came out in the 6th intercostal space, yes, it could. A photograph would have clarified both the 4th rib and the 6th rib. And a photograph of the lung would have clarified exactly where it went. Do you want me to go on with the lung?
Let me ask. What was the cause of death in this case?
It is my opinion that this is the wound that caused Laquan to die so rapidly.
And what do you base your opinion on?
I base my opinion on the fact that he died from bleeding, that this gunshot wound went through the hilum or a major blood vessel that has much higher pressure than the peripheral vessels of the lung, and that he would bleed out pretty rapidly from that.
Can you show the jury where the bullet penetrated in the diagram to the right by circling it?
So it went into the chest here, and then it went through the lung. And so this is the lung and the heart together, just a diagram. So what happens is that the deoxygenated blood from our body goes into the right side of the heart, and the right side of the heart via the pulmonary artery, which is this blue thing here, divides into two and goes into the right and left, takes that blood to the entire lung. The lung oxygenates it, puts it oxygen, and then it comes back into the heart via the pulmonary vein, which is actually should be in red. It's not there. You can see it's here. But also at the hilum, where the pulmonary vein is also the bronchus and the pulmonary veins. The pressure in the pulmonary veins is lower. It's the pressure in the pulmonary artery that causes the rapid bleeding. So if that area was involved, it would cause rapid bleeding. So I just put a red line across it to say that's where it is, and then
That's where what is?
where the wound in the lung was.
And you put a line on the pulmonary artery, correct?
Correct. It's a
Alright.
pulmonary artery, and actually the pulmonary vein is there too, but it's opposite here because the pulmonary artery is actually blue because it has deoxygenated blood. Usually we show the arteries in red, but it's opposite.